Okay, we are reading Kiev today. That is our chapter. It's just her name. And first, they killed my father. 6 months after Kiev left our village, and 16 months since the Khmer Rouge took power, a young girl arrives at our village in the morning looking for Ma and Pa. I come with a message from Kiev, she says. You must come to the hospital. She is very sick and she wants to see you. Why? What's wrong with her? Ma managed to ask, shifting Geek on her hip. The nurse believes it is something she ate. She has a terrible case of diarrhea. You must come now. She has been sick all morning and asking for you all this time. Paul cannot get off work to go see Kiev, and we do not know how sick she is. After receiving permission from the chief, Ma leaves with the girl to see Kiev. Kiev still lives in Kong Chalat, a teenage work camp with about 160 laborers. The teenagers are separated in two houses, one for the boys and one for the girls. At the camp, they work from dawn until dusk in the rice fields. The girls are given less food than the boys, but are expected to work just as hard. Both their food rations consist only of watery rice soup and salted fish. After Pa and Kim leave for work, Chow, Geek, and I wait for Ma to return. Since we have no instruments to tell us the time, and we're no good at guessing it from the sun's position in the sky, the wait feels like forever. While Chow fans the flies off Geek, who is asleep beside her, I pace the ground in front of our hut. Each step I take, the earth beneath seems to shift, throwing me off balance. Each breath I take, the air rushes quickly down my throat, choking me. In my mind, I envision Kiev at her camp. Kiev woke one day to notice that her stomach was bloated and rumbling, making sounds as if something was swishing around inside. She ignored it, believing it was merely hunger pains. She took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. Always there are the hunger pains. Sometimes the hunger pains hurt so much that they spread to every part of the body. It has been a long time since she'd had enough to eat. She rubbed her hand on her stomach, telling it to settle down. Following the rules, she rolls her straw mat off the floor and leans it against the wall. The dirt floor is hard and full of black ants and other bugs. At night, she always makes sure she closes her mouth tightly and pulls her blanket up above her head, hoping to leave no openings for the bugs to crawl in. She looks around her camp, her eyes focusing on a few faces she recognizes among the 80 girls she lives with. She smiles at them but is greeted with blank stares. Clenching her teeth together, she turns away from them and inhales deeply. She knows she cannot show her emotion, or the supervisor will think she is weak and not worth keeping alive. Unlike our family's hut in Rolit, she does not have the privacy of her own space to let go of her emotions. At the camp, if she cries, she will be judged by 160 pairs of eyes that will think her weak, and she misses us so. This time the tears spill over, and she quickly wipes them with her sleeves before anyone sees. In my mind's eye, I see Kiev breathing deeply and trying to fill the void in her heart. Her lungs expand and take in more air as she chases our images away. This loneliness, how is she to survive this loneliness? To live in a place where no one cares about her and everyone is out to get her. She has no protection there. She's utterly and completely alone. She misses Pa so much, misses his protection and the way he looks after her and he worries about her. She misses Ma's arms around her, stroking her hair. She walks over to the water tank and scoops out a bowl of water to wash her face with. She uses a piece of her old black pajama shirt to try and clean her teeth, remembering how Paul wanted her to take care of herself. She rubs the cloth across her teeth a few times, but her gums are too sore and she quits. She looks at her reflection in the water and gasps. She is ugly. Would anyone believe that she was once a very beautiful girl? She is 15 and looks no bigger than a 12-year-old. Her fingers gently touch her protruding cheekbones. In Phnom Penh, she often protected her skin with cleanser and moisturizers. How damaged by the sun it is marked with scars and pimples. Her oily hair is so thin that her scalp peeks through. It is cut short in the same block style as the rest of the 80 girls and makes her look like a young boy. She glances at her body and she recoils. Her arms and legs are like sticks, but her stomach is fat and bulges out like she is pregnant. Tears flow easily from her eyes, but it is okay. She could disguise them by splashing water on her face, pretending to wash her eyes. She is 15 and has never held a boy's hand, never been kissed by a boy, never felt a lover's warm embrace. There are a lot of nevers in her life, not that it matters now. She only longs for them because she wanted someday to experience the love Ma and Pa have for one another. She wraps her red scarf around her head and walks toward the rice fields. Every day she works in the rice fields, planting and harvesting rice. Every day it is back breaking work. It is only 5 a.m., but today she could see that the sky is hazy and cloudless. The air is already hot and humid. In an hour, the haze dissipates to expose a white sky. Her black pajama pants and shirt absorb the sun's rays, and sweat drips out of all her pores. With the sun beating down on the top of her head, the heat and humidity make it difficult for her to breathe. An hour passes and her stomach continues to growl, making loud, angry noises. She ignores it, hoping it will eventually settle itself. Talking and singing isn't allowed during work. Planting rice now has become an automatic physical action, requiring no concentration. Thus, she has a lot of time to spend with herself in her head, too much time even. Her mind grows lazy and wanders around too many topics. Her schoolwork, a cute boy she met in Phnom Penh, movies she saw, but always it comes back to our family. She misses us so much. Another hour passes, and her stomach is now in great pain, causing her to double over. She wraps her arms around her stomach, runs to the bushes, pulls her pants to her ankles, and lets the poison run out of her. She pulls her pants up and walks back to the fields, but soon has to rush to a bush again. After several visits to the bushes, she finally walks over to the supervisor. Please, I am very ill. It is my stomach. May I take the rest of the day off and visit the infirmary? She pleads with the supervisor. The supervisor looks at her with disgust and contempt. No, I do not believe you are sick. We all have hunger pains. You are just a lazy, worthless city girl. Go back to work. Kiev's heart shatters at being so denigrated. Another hour passes, but her stomach refuses to settle down. In that hour, she spent 10 minutes in the rice field and the rest of the time in the bushes. She is then so sick and weak that she has to drag her body to the supervisor. Please, I am very sick. I cannot stand up any more. As sick as she is, Kiev's face burns with embarrassment as she follows the supervisor's gaze to her leg. On her last trip, Kiev soiled her pants. You smell terrible. All right, you have permission to go to the hospital. Finally, with permission slip in hand, Kiev staggers back to her camp and collapses. An hour after she leaves the field, Kiev finally arrives at the makeshift hospital where there are many patients waiting to see the nurses. The hospital is a decrepit old building with many cots lined up on the ground. When Kiev approaches a nurse and reports her illness, the nurse takes her arm and leads her to a cot to lie down. Without taking her pulse or touching her, the nurse asks Kiev a few brief questions about her symptoms and hurries away, saying she will return later to check on her and bring some medicine. Kiev knows this is a lie. There is no medicine. There are no real doctors or nurses, only ordinary people ordered to pretend to be medical experts. All the real doctors and nurses were killed by the Ankar long ago. Still, Kiev is glad to be out of the sun. At Row Leap, when the sun hovers directly over my head, the lunch bell rings at 1 p.m. Rushing out of our hut, Chow, Geek, and I meet Paul and Kim at the communal kitchen to receive our ration. Sitting in the shade, we eat our meal of thin rice soup and salted fish in silence. Chow feeds Geek from her own bowl, being careful Geek doesn't spill or drop anything. Her round stomach, small head, stick like arms, and legs look disproportional to the rest of her body. All around us, groups of 5 to 10 people sit together and quietly consume just enough food to live for another day. I look up and see Ma's figure returning. Her face is red and puffy from crying. We know something is seriously wrong, yet none of us are ready for the shock of the news. Ma weeps as she whispers the words. She's not going to live. She's not going to make it. Kiev is not going to survive the night. She is very sick and has a bad case of dysentery. They believe she ate poisonous food. She is so very thin and sick just from one morning of diarrhea. Ma drags her palms from her eyes down to her cheeks as she describes Kiev to us. She tells us there is no flesh left on Kiev's body. Kiev's eyes are sunken deep into her sockets, and she can hardly open them to look at her. When she first saw Ma, she did not recognize her. Kiev wheezed and gasped for air just from trying to talk to her, and Ma breaks down and weeps loudly. When she finally did speak, she kept asking for Pa. Ma, where's Pa? Ma, go get Pa. I know I'm going to die, and I want to see him one last time. I want him to bring me home to be near the family, Ma tells us. That is her last wish, to see her family and be near them even after she's gone. She said she is tired and wants to sleep, but will wait for Pa to get there. She is so weak she cannot raise her hand to wave the flies away from her face. She is so dirty, they didn't even clean her mess up until I got there. They just let her lie there in her sickness and dirty sheets. No one is taking care of my daughter. After Ma and Pa receive permission from the chief to go get Kiev, they hurriedly leave together. I sit on the steps of our hut with Kim, Chow, and Geek, watching our parents disappear to bring my oldest sister home to us. Kim and Chow sit quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Geek crawls over to me and asks where Ma went. Receiving no answers from us, she climbs down the steps to sit on the ground. Picking up a branch, she draws circles, squares, and crude pictures of our hut in the dirt. As we wait, the minutes turn into hours, and hours into eternity, and the sun refuses to lower in the sky to make time pass faster. I follow them in my mind as they travel to the hospital to find my sister. I imagine Kiev there waiting for our parents. Kiev remembers the feel of Ma's hand softly touching her forehead. It is the best thing in the world to have someone love you. Though she cannot feel her body much, it is nice to have Ma's hand on her, cleaning, wiping, smoothing her hair. She misses them so much. She misses Ma so much now. The memory brings a small smile to her lips. She smiles again, thinking of Ma, but soon the smile turns to tears, and she cries silently, finally letting go of her emotions. She wishes Ma didn't have to see her like this, worrying about how she appears to Ma during her last visit. Ma is so shocked and sad to see Kiev in this condition. Ma cries a great deal and tells her profusely how much she is loved. Ma gently holds her hands and kisses her forehead. She wants to sit up for Ma, but her body is so weak that the slightest movement is painful. There is so much she wants to say to Ma, but talking is difficult. She is frustrated at being trapped in a body that refuses to move. When Ma leaves, Kiev can only turn her head to watch her disappear. Come back quickly, Ma, she whispers. She knows Ma does not want to leave her, but Kiev wants to see Pa one last time. She misses him and the rest of her family so much. A wave of sadness washes over her and seeps into every inch of her body, taking her breath away. A sadness so enormous and overwhelming she does not know what to do with it. A black fly buzzes over and lands on her hand. She is too weak to swat it off. A strange chill runs up her spine. She knows it to be pure fear. Her heart weighs so heavy, and it is getting more and more difficult to breathe. Pa, I'm so afraid, she cries into the thin air. Please come see me soon. When at last I see their distant figures return, my siblings and I rush toward them. My heart breaks when I see my parents return without my sister. Their faces are drawn and long. I run to them for news of my sister's condition, though in my heart I know she's already dead. Ma, having lost her oldest daughter, runs to her youngest daughter, 4-year-old Geek, and clasps her tightly. Kiev was already dead by the time we got there, Pa speaks wearily. She died shortly before we arrived. The nurse said she kept asking if we had arrived yet, saying how she wanted to be home and nowhere else. We got there too late. I asked the nurse if I could take her body home, but they no longer knew where she was. They had thrown her body out because they needed her bed for the next patient. We tried to look for her among the dead on the floor, but could not find her. The nurse went on to tell Pa that more than a dozen girls died that day from food poisoning. She said it is lucky they were notified at all. Most of the time they don't know where to contact the parents. Those they have those they have no contacts for they bury right away. Kiev's body must have gotten mixed up with them. They acted as if we should be thankful, we were told. Now she's dead and we cannot find her. Pa tries to control his anger, but his face contorts, his shoulders shaking. Pa hides his tears from us and covers his face with his hands. I asked them if I could have Kiev's belongings, Ma whispers hoarsely. The nurse went to look for them, but came back with nothing. When I saw her, Kiev still had the gold watch, a gift from us that she kept hidden. When she knew she was dying, she took it out and wore it for the first time. The nurse said she does not remember seeing a watch on her wrist and does not know where it is. Most likely someone had stolen it off her wrist. I cannot listen any more. I run and run, finding myself heading for the woods. There, beneath a large tree, next to a thick bush, I hide from the rest of the world. Hugging my knees tightly to my chest, I rest my head on my forearms. I cup my hands over my mouth and I scream out in pain over the cruel death of my sister. The sound burns in my throat, fighting to be released, but I hold it in as tears stream out of my eyes. People have always said that Kiev and I were similar in many ways. We looked almost identical to each other and were also alike in personality. We were both headstrong and always ready to fight. Kiev's last wish was not granted. She did not get to see Pa before she died. I wrap my arms around my stomach and double over in pain, falling to the ground. In the thick grass, my tears pour out for my sister and seep into the earth. That night, lying on my back, my hands crossed over my chest, I asked Chow what happens to people when they die. No one knows for sure, but it is believed that at first they sleep peacefully, not knowing they are dead. They sleep for 3 days, and on the third day they wake up and try to return home. That's when they realize they are dead. They are sad, but have to make peace with themselves. Then they walk to a river, wash the dirt off their bodies, and start their journey to heaven to wait for the next reincarnated life. When will they be reincarnated? I don't know, Chow replies. I hope she won't be reincarnated here, I say quietly. Chow reaches out for my hand and holds it gently as she wipes her eyes with her sleeve. I think about what Chow has just told me. I imagine Kiev sleeping peacefully somewhere. On the third night, she wakes up only to realize that she is dead. It saddens me to think of her pain upon finding out she cannot return home. I imagine Kiev in heaven watching over us, finally happy again. I picture her the way she looked before the war and wearing a white gown and washing in the river. I see her the way she looked in Phnom Penh, not the way Ma described her. It's so sad for a culture that does not have God, that does not have Jesus, that has no hope. The reality of Kiev's death is too sad, so I create a fantasy world to live in. In my mind, she is granted her last wish. Paul gets there in time to hear Kiev tell him how much she loves him, and he gives her our messages of love. He holds her in his arms as she dies peacefully, feeling love, not fear. Paul then brings Kiev's body home to be buried, to be forever with us instead of being lost. I wake up the next morning feeling guilty because I did not dream about Kiev at all. Pa is already off to work. Ma's face is red and swollen, and as always, she is holding Geek. Ma and Kiev never got along well. Kiev was wild and temperamental. Ma wanted her to change, to be more ladylike, more subdued. I wonder about the regrets Ma must have over their relationship. Regrets about all those times they fought in Phnom Penh over what music Kiev listened to or the clothes she wore. Ma turns and looks at me, her eyes cloud over. For a brief moment I want to reach out to her and give her some comfort, but I cannot, and I turn away from her staring eyes. Our lives will never be the same again after Kiev's death. Hunger and death have numbed our spirits. It is as if we have lost all our energy for life. We all have to forget her death and continue. Paul tries hard to encourage us. We have to go about our ways as if nothing has happened. We don't want the chief to think that we can no longer contribute to their society. We have to save our strength to go on. Kiev would want us to go on. It is the only way we will survive.